The Deathworlders had long believed they were the galaxy's only true masters. Their home planet, Recton Prime, was a place where survival demanded perfection. Its skies churned with corrosive storms, and its land seethed with predators honed by eons of relentless evolution. Only the strongest and most cunning species could rise in such a crucible, and rise they did. They built empires from their hardships, crafting fleets that darkened the void and weapons that could boil oceans. They sought out the stars not for companionship, but for conquest, only to find the silence of a barren galaxy. Over centuries, their search for intelligent life became a hunt, spurred by a conviction that any rival must be eliminated before it could grow. Planets bearing nascent ecosystems were sterilized, potential threats reduced to ash. No resistance emerged. No other voices cried out from the void. The Deathworlders, grimly triumphant, settled into a solitary dominion. They were alone, and they thrived in their isolation. But in the vast emptiness between stars, signals sometimes whispered. It was rare for these murmurs to hold anything of interest. Static from dying stars, or the faint echoes of ancient cosmic events. When a peculiar transmission reached one of their border scouts, it was treated no differently. Anomalous, yes, but hardly remarkable. The scout's commander, Sirik Vala, authorized further analysis out of routine protocol rather than any genuine concern. Sirik was a product of his people's brutal legacy. A towering figure with features sharpened by Recton's unyielding gravity, he carried an air of quiet menace. His gaze, cold and calculating, swept over the data before him. The signal was weak but deliberate, structured in a way that suggested intelligence. Yet its source, a star system on the fringes of their domain, was utterly unremarkable. Curiosity gnawed at him. It was an emotion his kind disdained, associating it with the weaker instincts of lesser creatures. Still, Sirik ordered a probe dispatched to the signal's origin, a pale blue planet orbiting a yellow star. Its surface seemed laughably tame by Recton standards: mild weather, breathable air, and water flowing freely. A paradise, perhaps, for a species too frail to survive anywhere else. The probe returned images of cities sprawling like neural networks, their lights visible even from orbit. Sirik leaned forward, his claws tapping the console. The creatures below were small, their forms lithe and unarmored. They moved with an easy grace, interacting with their environment in ways that suggested advanced cognition. They were fragile, vulnerable, yet unmistakably intelligent. Sirik's lips curled into a predatory smile. He could not decide whether to admire their audacity or pity their inevitable fate. A species so delicate had no right to challenge the silence of the galaxy. He transmitted his findings to the Dominion High Council, expecting swift authorization to eliminate the potential threat. To his surprise, the council hesitated, intrigued by the creature's apparent technological progress. The council's decision was unexpected, observe before annihilation. Sirik seethed at the delay, but obeyed. His fleet lingered at the edge of the system, cloaked from detection, as they watched the species, humans as their broadcasts called them, move between ignorance and audacity. Their technology was crude by Deathworlder standards, their weapons laughable, but their ingenuity was undeniable. The humans had launched themselves into orbit on fragile rockets and sent probes to distant planets, all with a reckless determination that bordered on insanity. For weeks, the fleet gathered data. Sirik grew increasingly impatient, his instincts screaming that inaction was a mistake. But his orders were clear. He was not to intervene unless provoked. The humans, blissfully unaware of their observers, continued to explore their tiny corner of the galaxy. Sirik's patience finally snapped when a human probe, a boxy, solar-powered contraption, crossed into Deathworlder space. It posed no threat. How could it? But its presence was an insult. Sirik seized the opportunity. He ordered a small intercept squad to retrieve the probe, a task so simple it required no effort. The humans would not even know it was gone. But when the Deathworlder ships moved to capture it, they were surprised to find resistance. Not from the probe itself, but from an unexpected escort. A human vessel, crude but armed, appeared to defend its creation. The ship was minuscule compared to the Deathworlders' massive cruisers, and its weapons barely registered as a threat. Yet it maneuvered with precision, its pilots displaying a level of skill that Sirik had not anticipated. They dodged the interceptors' attempts to disable them, using their ship's agility to their advantage. It was a futile effort. Sirik's forces overwhelmed the humans within moments, seizing both their ship and the probe. As he watched the captured human craft brought aboard his flagship, Sirik felt an unfamiliar flicker of uncertainty. These creatures were not what he had expected. They were not predators like his kind, but neither were they prey. There was something else, something unsettling about their defiance. When the human crew was escorted to the bridge, Sirik studied them with a mixture of disdain and curiosity. They were smaller than he had imagined, their forms almost delicate. Yet their eyes burned with a fierce intelligence, and their expressions held no trace of fear. One of them, a woman with sharp features and an air of quiet authority, stepped forward. Her voice was steady as she addressed Sirik, her words translated through a clumsy but functional device. "We come in peace," she said, "but we will defend ourselves if necessary." The audacity of her statement left Sirik momentarily speechless. He had expected pleading, perhaps even groveling, but this calm declaration of intent caught him off guard. His response was colder than he intended. "You trespass in our domain. Peace was never an option." Her gaze did not waver. "We didn't know this was your territory. If we did, we would have sought permission before entering. But now that we've met, perhaps we can open a dialogue." Dialogue. The word sounded absurd to Sirik. In his world, survival required dominance, not conversation. Yet something about this human's demeanor unsettled him. She was not afraid, nor was she submissive. She spoke as if they were equals, a notion that both angered and intrigued him. Sirik dismissed them, ordering his crew to detain the humans while he decided their fate. Yet even as they were led away, he found his thoughts lingering on their words. Dialogue. The concept was alien to him, yet it struck a chord he could not ignore. For the first time in centuries, Sirik felt the weight of uncertainty. The humans were fragile, yes, but there was a strength in them that defied logic. They had stared into the eyes of a predator and refused to flinch. Perhaps, he thought, the galaxy was not as silent as he had believed. The Deathworlder flagship loomed in orbit, its dark hull casting an ominous shadow over the pale, blue world below. Inside its cavernous halls, tension simmered as Sirik Vala reviewed the intercepted data from the human ship. The humans were anomalous, fragile creatures driven by what seemed like a reckless defiance of their own limitations. Their technological progress, while rudimentary compared to the Deathworlders, was accelerating at an alarming pace. Sirik's instincts screamed that they were a threat, but his orders remained unchanged. Observe, gather intelligence, and refrain from annihilation unless absolutely necessary. In the holding bay, Captain Elena Ward and her crew stood surrounded by towering Deathworlder guards. Elena's gaze never faltered, though the sheer size of the creatures before her was enough to unsettle even her seasoned nerves. The Deathworlders were monsters, their features sharp and predatory, their presence a constant reminder of the harsh world that had shaped them. Yet it wasn't their appearance that unnerved her most, it was their silence. These beings, so clearly engineered for dominance, had yet to unleash the violence their presence promised. Instead, they watched, studied, as if waiting for something. Elena's mind raced as she considered their predicament. Humanity's first encounter with extraterrestrial life had taken a disastrous turn, and the weight of responsibility pressed heavily on her. She glanced at her crew, 4 men and women who had followed her without hesitation into the unknown. Despite their circumstances, they held their ground, their expressions a mix of fear and determination. They trusted her to find a way through this, to turn a standoff with an apex predator into something more than survival. Sirik entered the holding bay, his imposing form casting a long shadow across the humans. His dark eyes swept over them, taking in every detail of their stance, their expressions, their strange, unarmored forms. To his surprise, they did not cower. The leader, the one they called Ward, met his gaze with a calm intensity that belied her fragile appearance. "You sent a probe into our space," Sirik said, his voice a low growl. "What did you hope to achieve?" Elena stepped forward, her translator crackling faintly as it struggled to keep pace with her measured words. "We didn't know this was your space. We're explorers." The room was silent save for the hum of the Deathworlder flagship systems, a subtle reminder of the immense power surrounding them. Elena Ward stood in the center of the council chamber, a lone human among the galaxy's most formidable species. Around her, Sirik Vala and his advisors observed, their expressions unreadable but their attention absolute. It was a moment unlike any the galaxy had known, a predator and a potential rival in dialogue, rather than at war. Sirik's voice broke the silence, low and deliberate. "You speak of exploration, of peace. Yet your kind has built weapons and dared to cross into the unknown. That is not the behavior of prey." Elena held his gaze, her tone calm but firm. "We are not prey, nor are we predators. We are survivors, like you, but with a different path. We've learned that strength is more than force. It's in cooperation, in building something greater together." The council exchanged glances, their skepticism almost palpable. For beings forged in the crucible of Recton Prime, strength had always meant domination. This notion of cooperation seemed naive at best, dangerous at worst. Yet Sirik felt the dissonance growing within him. These humans, so physically unimpressive, carried themselves with a resolve that defied explanation. "Your kind is fragile," Sirik said, his voice sharpening. "Your bones would snap under the gravity of our homeworld. Your minds lack the instincts to survive in true hostility. What do you offer that we cannot take?" Elena allowed a small, measured smile. "Adaptability, imagination, empathy, qualities that thrive even where brute strength fails. You see weakness in our form, but it has driven us to create, to innovate, to connect. Alone, we are vulnerable. Together, we are unstoppable." The words hung in the air, an audacity Sirik could not dismiss. The human's history, brief though it was compared to his own species' lineage, spoke of boundless resourcefulness. Their progress from primitive tools to interstellar travel in mere centuries was nothing short of extraordinary. Yet Sirik's instincts warned him against trust. Empathy and cooperation, these ideas she championed, could just as easily mask deception. Before he could respond, an alert flared across the chamber. A holographic display filled the air with images, a vast anomaly at the edge of Deathworlder space. The council members tensed, their focus shifting immediately to the threat. Elena turned to observe, her brow furrowing at the sight of the distortion. "What is it?" she asked. Sirik's gaze darkened. "A disturbance, a rift in space, growing larger. It has no precedent in our records." The holographic display shifted, revealing streams of data interspersed with visual distortions. It was not a natural phenomenon. Something was emerging from the rift. Sirik's advisor spoke in hushed tones, their words heavy with unease. Elena's eyes narrowed as she studied the images. "It looks like a portal, and whatever's on the other side isn't friendly." Moments later, the first ships emerged, sleek, angular vessels with a predatory design that even the Deathworlders found chilling. Their scans revealed no organic life aboard, only machines driven by an advanced, alien intelligence. The Deathworlder fleet scrambled to respond, their commanders barking orders as ships moved into defensive formations. Elena felt the weight of the moment pressing against her. This was a force neither human nor Deathworlder had anticipated, and its intentions were clear in its movements: annihilation. Sirik turned to her, his expression cold and calculating. "You claim your strength lies in cooperation. Prove it. Stand with us, or be swept away." Elena nodded, the decision made in an instant. "We'll fight, but if we're going to survive, we need to work together, not just side by side." For the first time, Sirik felt a flicker of respect. This fragile human, standing before a force far beyond her own capabilities, did not hesitate. Perhaps there was something to this idea of strength in unity. The battle was chaos. Deathworlder cruisers engaged the alien ships head-on, their weapons carving through enemy hulls with brutal efficiency. But the machines were relentless, adapting to each countermeasure with terrifying speed. Human ingenuity proved invaluable. Elena's crew returned to their ship, coordinated maneuvers that exploited the machine's rigid tactics, creating openings the Deathworlders could exploit. As the battle raged, Elena and Cyric found themselves working in unison, their strategies complementing each other in ways neither had anticipated. Elena's quick thinking and Cyric's instinct for calculated aggression turned the tide, each learning from the other in real time. The alien fleet, though formidable, could not match the combined force of human adaptability and Deathworlder strength. Ship by ship, the invaders were pushed back, their advance slowing until the rift itself began to collapse. As the final enemy vessel disintegrated, a silence fell over the battlefield, broken only by the distant hum of surviving ships. In the aftermath, Elena stood on the Deathworlder bridge, her uniform singed and her expression weary but determined. Cyric approached her, his gaze heavy with contemplation. "You fought well," he said. "Better than I expected." "You did too," she replied, her tone steady. "But you see now what we can accomplish together. Neither of us would have survived alone." Cyric did not respond immediately. For a species that had lived by the creed of dominance, accepting such a truth was no small thing. Yet the evidence was undeniable. Humanity had proven itself, not just in battle, but in its willingness to share its strengths without hesitation. The council convened later, their deliberations intense but swift. For the first time in their history, the Deathworlders chose a path that did not end in destruction. They offered humanity an alliance, not as equals, for such a concept was foreign to them, but as something closer to partners. As Elena prepared to return to her ship, Cyric approached her once more. His voice was quieter this time, almost reflective. "Perhaps the galaxy is larger than we imagined, and perhaps strength takes more forms than we knew." Elena smiled faintly. "Perhaps, but this is only the beginning. We've both got a lot to learn." As the human vessel departed, Cyric watched it disappear into the void, his thoughts heavy with the implications of what had transpired. The galaxy had changed that day. For better or worse, only time would tell. But one thing was certain, the silence of the stars had been broken, and in its place, a fragile but undeniable hope had begun to take root.